Psychologist Brian Walsh spoke with a broad range of men about crying. Men cry for all sorts of reasons. What makes you cry?
Personal tragedy in my family, amongst my friends, work colleagues. I think tragedy generally, disasters that befall people. I think I cry just sometimes when the sadness just overtakes you, overwhelms you. If I broke my leg, I'd probably cry. No, but I think that's, death, tragedy. Oh, and yes, there is something else. I'll cry in movies, I'll cry because something bad happened, but I'll probably cry because there's a reunion. The dog came home.
So like stress, emotional, like relationships, like that kind of stuff. Friends, falling out with friends, or soccer, not making the team, or anything like that. It's just little things that get to me, I guess.
I must say I've got a track record of crying at funerals, at my grandfather's funeral. It was an emotional funeral, and there was a full church, and he had got through the Second World War. He was a prisoner, and then I remember turning around and looking behind me at the back of the church, seeing a row of men, maybe six men in suits, all wearing medals, and they were returned servicemen, and they all stood up, and they all had their hands on their heart, and very somber, and that was the thing that really choked me up at that moment. It encompasses something bigger, a broader sort of sadness, because these men were all moved because they'd shared this experience, but there was something about time. The fact that it was about a man who's passing away in his 80s, and there was all this history, that maybe the layer of history had something to do with my response to that. It seemed deeply sad and very sad to see these other men moved to stand up and make this gesture at that time.
I cry sometimes when I'm frustrated and can't find the words to express how I feel about something that's really important to me.
I've certainly got to the point in a decent comedy act of laughing to the point of tears.
Breaking up with my first girlfriend, that was like a big thing. That's probably I've cried the most about the things. I guess funerals. I've only ever been to two, but one was one of my best friends in high school. His older sister died. All of us friends were sort of seated in one row at the funeral, and then our friend whose sister died got up to do his speech, and he was crying, and I could tell that like all of us were all crying as well. So it was it was, really sad.
I cried when my children were born. I cried when my children's children were born. I just find I'm more emotional now since I've been sick.
The main thing that makes me cry most these days is missing my kids as well. That's a biggie. Like, it's usually Lockie and my son and I that go there to catch up, and it's really a good time. We just hang out and enjoy each other's company, and just be like normal families, I guess. But when it's time to leave, when it's time to go, it's almost like you go into like a mourning. It's a grief and mourning sort of a phase. And it can sometimes take days and weeks to get back to normal. The mourning for the kids, that's something that's wretched, that stuff. I hate that.
In the still of the night.
For me, it's mostly been about loss. Maybe I've been interested in someone for a while, and you build it up in your mind. You have that really excited, when you're around them, it's really exciting, and then maybe things don't work out, and crumbling of how I wish things would be, or the idea of, you know, things should be this way, and it's almost a rebalancing into sort of, you know, what is, I guess. It's
probably things that involve the children. One of my boys was up for drink driving, and he was working for us, and he didn't tell us until a letter arrived, and I got emotionally upset about that.
I used to cry when I am very angry, when I can't support, I can't bear something that's wrong, or something I have a difficulty to manage with. I can cry, but it's very few.
Certainly my mother's early death. I didn't cry all that much. Later on, one of Bach's famous pieces called Bist du bei mir, which if you look at the text, it has to do with death and dying. That triggers it off. And it's not just because of the text, but because it was sung on the last walk I had with my mother and my father too, before she died. Then we heard two guys sitting on a huge fallen tree. One of them was singing Bist du bei mir. So that has always been linked now.
Sit down. Sit. Come on. Sit. Direct family, seeing their happiness, that makes me cry. Obviously joy. Seeing other people cry sometimes makes me cry. When I think of crying, for some reason, I think tears of joy, not so much crying from something sad or unhappy.
Or loss and frustration. And maybe this evolves as you go through life, but loss of loved ones, loss of parents. Frustration, maybe that's a bit more public. The most tangible example I can think of is communication. Not with someone at work or that, but someone who's close, when we're trying to connect but can't find the wavelength or find the words. That'll get me frustrated, and a few tears or a bit of other emotion will come out. The other thing that triggers me is fulfillment or liberation. There's some happy moments of crying.
I mean, first and foremost, I don't cry nearly as much as I should. The end result of that is some really restrained and suppressed emotion, which usually results in anger, that somewhere along the lines we've decided to stitch up that capacity to cry, and that hasn't done us any good.
I've only really started crying, I think, at all in the last few years. I would say I spent most of my adult life never ever crying. I noticed that I only ever cry when I'm observing someone else in some sort of emotional situation. I never cry on my own behalf. I cry at movies and TV programs. It's just there's been this sort of outpouring in the last few years. And occasionally when there's a client, especially a couple, with me, I don't actually burst out crying, but I notice tears come to my eyes. And in thinking about this, I've got a little tear going down my eye now, so just interesting, that's how that's happened. I wasn't expecting this to happen at all in this interview. And it's about resolution. It's when there's some sort of issue or conflict or something, and there's a point of resolution.
Like most humans, I respond badly to cruelty. I sympathise with pain and with suffering. Someone experiences any misfortune, I feel like I want to help. I don't cry often. You know, I'm a movie guy, and I have seen some of the most heartbreaking, moving, inspiring films throughout my life, and I've been driven to tears, and not once. But I've never really cried. I suppose it comes out of that masculine culture I've grown up around where expressing yourself in that way is unthinkable. It's against the rules.
I don't know, stupid people make me cry. You know, people that are insensitive, I suppose I can be a bit insensitive myself. But, you know, humans all have, in my experience, have different levels of, you know, what makes them cry. You know, tough guys cry, weak guys cry, all sorts of, so that's what.
At my father's funeral, more recently when I said to my daughter that she owed me quite a bit of money, and I said that I would cancel the payment of the loan, and she just broke down and started crying, and that just got me going. And
When was the last time you cried?
Almost 2 months ago, and it was when we were looking after a litter of kittens, and there was one which I had a pretty good bond with, and it's because it was a bit special, and his name was Spenny, and he was a bit slow, he was a bit slower than the rest, and I just really bonded with him. He died quite suddenly after a heat wave, and I was very surprised at how much that really affected me, and I cried about that for days.
It was sort of a couple of nights ago, and I was watching an episode of West Wing, and there's a couple of those which are beautifully put together piece of emotional tearjerkers, which caused me to have a few drops come out.
The last time I distinctly remember crying was when I was in my early 20s, and I was in a bit of a bad way, you know. Yeah, just sort of the mindset that I was in at the time. Sort of felt pretty lonely and a bit desperate and feeling a bit sorry for myself. So.
I cried when I found out I had to go on to insulin to appease my diabetes, and I thought I could control it up to that point with medication. I was told the medication wasn't working. I was then told by a specialist that I would need insulin shots, and once she left the room, you know, there was a couple of tears coming down the cheeks and a little bit of gentle sobbing, I guess, and my wife was understanding, but it was an emotional time.
It just happened yesterday. I was just listening to the radio, listened to ABC, and just had that older Chinese lady that had stormed into the press conference, and she was wailing, you know, her son, and it just made me think of, you know, where Larissa's at, and, you know, if anything ever happened to that child, what it would do to me. So I mean, I don't think I actually shed a tear, but it really made me feel like I might.
The recent loss of our little dog, she was a 16-year-old Chihuahua cross. That was days of crying. Also the thinking about the effect that had on my little son, that made me cry. Quite a few times my wife would come out, I'd be working in the garden, she'd come out and she'd put her arms around me, she'd be crying, that'd make me cry. So when my parents passed away, and both times I cried.
Seeing my parents on the Gold Coast, I thought, well, maybe it might be the last time I see them. I didn't cry in front of them, but later on when I was thinking about it, I just thought, well, they're a long way away, and sort of they can jump in the car and pop around the corner and, you know, sort of say what you want to say or be with them or what have you. So it was a bit uncomfortable.
There's one favourite song I have that reminds me so much of Michelle when she was a baby, sort of thing, you know. And whenever I hear that song, it just wow, you know.
I was watching a movie with my brother who was visiting from the US. So we were watching that movie about Rodriguez. Very late in life, he gets the opportunity to go back and perform to people who've loved him for a long time that he never knew about. So there was sort of amazing fulfillment and liberation for him in those moments, and I was very touched by that. But it was also my brother being there and us being very very close in taste on things like music and the things that touch us. We're I don't know, chemically very similar, in some way. So just the two of us being together and experiencing that added another dimension to it. So, you know, a little moment, but a memorable one.
Would have been about 3 or 4 weeks ago. It was in regards to basically me having dealt with a lot of loss in regards to my studies because of recent funding changes with the government. I ended up losing my degree. It was quite a bit out of frustration out of that and having wasted a fair bit of money and time.
During Mum's passing, you know, during that whole you know, period, I cried doing the eulogy at a funeral, and certainly, yeah, shed a lot of tears that you know, in that period directly afterwards. My wife and I had trouble with you know, with pregnancy, and you know, during those times, yeah, there were tears shed.
On average, how many times a year would you cry?
Now I find myself probably like once a month I'll cry.
2 or 3 times a month now.
Yeah, maybe once every 8 months a year. I'm not really sure.
3 times a year, but this last 10 years it was very few. Less than 1 time every 2 or 3 years.
Close to probably once a week.
Probably half a dozen times a year.
That emotional level with the kids could be weekly, it could be monthly.
Do you only cry privately, or do you allow yourself to cry in the presence of others?
Yeah, I definitely, as a male, find it difficult to cry in front of women.
Before I got sick, I could walk away and hop in a truck and pretend I was going to sleep and have a few tears run down my face, but no one would ever know. It's not something that I would put out there, if you want to call it that, especially in the transport industry.
Well, as I say, I don't let anyone know, and I have nothing like that ever happens.
Mostly I do on my own without anyone knowing. Just, I don't feel like everyone has to know if I'm sad.
Expression of emotion, really not part of growing up for me at home. Crying and weakness were the two things that went together.
I don't cry in crowds, so like I won't cry today.
I've never really cried in front of people, so to me it's just natural to just cry to myself or to my mum, because I love my mum, and I trust my mum, and I know she's always going to be there for me.
If you were emotional and you wanted to cry, you'd do it by yourself. You'd go away somewhere and do it.
The music, you know, can really touch me, and I can sort of, again, open up, you know, those channels to be able to cry. But, you know, I do it sort of inconspicuously.
When you cry, do you say sorry or feel you should apologise?
I think that is just like good manners.
No, and there's an honesty that comes when you're crying that is unique.
You spend so much of your time and effort trying to create an image which you're projecting onto other people that you feel that when you break down and destroy that image, you're betraying them and yourself. And you feel like you have to say, I'm sorry that I'm not the person you thought I was.
I'm not comfortable with it, but I don't apologise so much.
I have, and I do, but I ultimately feel like it's something that I would probably like to make a conscious effort to not apologise. Just recognising that you've changed the colour of the environment very drastically, very quickly as well, if you're crying, especially as a man. So the apology may just be a general courtesy for that.
I'm in company and with friends or something, and someone starts talking about something emotional or something that touches me, and I can get very leaky around the eyes. And I might feel a little embarrassed about that, but I don't apologise for it.
I mean, people say sorry to, fill in the space, and in difficult moments, I think, a lot of the time. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're showing regret or apologising or I've hurt your feelings by crying. Well, one of the few times probably when I've cried visibly in front of a lot of people, when I left a place that I'd worked for a long time and I had a lot of very strong relationships there that felt I needed to move on. And when I was had the little presentation and we were saying goodbye and all that, that was very, and I was just thanking people for their support. That was a very intense moment, and I shed a few tears and paused for a while and continued on. But I have a distinct recollection at that point of saying to myself, "Don't say you're sorry. Let this happen. Let the moment pass and move on." So probably the answer to your question is no. I don't feel the need to apologise.
Yeah, I do. I don't even know why, and I don't even think it's actually like. I think it's just a programmed response for me. I don't think I'm not actually being sincere in my apology.
It's probably more of diverting attention away, than drawing attention in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely apologise when I cry. I suppose that is because it's perceived as an embarrassing thing, so you go, "Oh, sorry." That's kind of natural reaction.
I don't have to apologise to anyone for, doing something that is a natural thing.
This is how I feel, I'm not apologetic about it.
And I do. And I think it's because it's an interruption. You treat it as an interruption. I just want to excuse this moment and not say, sorry to break that conversation.
How do you respond when you see men cry in public?
Depending on whether you're persuaded or the person in question is of your persuasion politically or not, you might, I would expect that you would be more empathetic if they were, and perhaps more critical or cynical, that the tears were crocodile tears if they weren't. But generally speaking, I mean, if you feel that it is it's a genuine emotion, then I think you respond genuinely.
If someone's representing a whole nation or a whole state, I don't think that they need to cry in public.
I remember the time when Ron Barassi was talking about, was on the Who Do You Think You Are program, and the old soldiers were telling about his father's death and how his father was terribly wounded and suffering greatly, and his only concern was with his little son, and Ron Barassi got pretty teary, and I did too. I was sitting there watching that, and it was really moving. And in fact, I would think that not to be moved to tears by that would be almost weird.
So it's not something that you see very often. I mean, the Bob Hawke one is very memorable to a lot of people. But even at the time, when I saw that, I thought, well, the guy's distressed about his daughter. What really surprised me, I didn't necessarily think that the Prime Minister crying was a story. In the media, that became the story, and all of that was a bit lost on me. I'm not sure why that someone expressing a bit of emotion as one of our leaders was a story. Are they supposed to be robots?
I'd probably look at them and think that they're human. I can probably relate to them and understand that they need to display that because of the intensity of their feeling.
Yeah, I'd probably be more somewhere between couldn't care less and sympathetic, because in the end, when it came down to it, I couldn't care less, but I understand that he's upset.
I think you can pretty easily see when it's disingenuous, and I don't think crying has any impact at all on their ability to do that job.
It's about what being a human is all about.
As a child, what did you learn about being male and crying?
I grew up thinking that it was out of the question.
From my immediate family, my father and my stepmother, mainly my father, you're not allowed to cry.
I learned not to cry. My father didn't cry. The first time I saw him cry was when I was leaving England to come to Australia. So I was 28 when that happened. and he just rushed out the room, you know, didn't want to linger with it at all. I remember one occasion when my mother cried when she thought my dad might be seriously ill. That was once in my whole of my childhood, I remember that. And she made it very clear that she didn't want to be around me when I was crying.
We've got a family that sort of is just like, just get on with it, just drive on with life and put the feelings in your pocket and away you go. Don't let emotions get in the way of what you're trying to do in life.
The messages I received were definitely like in a big European family, like not to cry as a boy. But as a little boy, there was nothing I loved more than crying. Crying was the best, the best thing to do as a kid. I got everything from crying. It was like it was your last resort tool, and I really worked it. And I was constantly told by my nunnu, who's my Maltese grandfather, that men don't cry. I do remember the first time I saw my dad cry. That was really terrifying. And maybe this goes back to that politician thing. I guess he was the leader in the family, and he was and for him to have no control anymore meant chaos, I guess. And that was really scary.
I was brought up in the northwestern suburbs of Sydney. It was very much stereotypical sort of upbringing for, the kids in the 50s and the early 60s. And it would have been that, once you got a bit older, once you weren't just a little boy, then boys and men don't cry.
If it's something small, then, don't be upset about it, just get on with it. If it were bigger, there was more understanding. Took a bit of learning, I guess.
My mother was always saying that not only it was okay to cry, that it was actually healthy, and that, you shouldn't stop yourself from crying because, even if you feel like you need to do it privately, you should still go through the motions of crying. She'd give me examples of my dad crying, so I would feel that it's okay, I assume. But then, uncles and, family friends and grandparents and things like that, especially probably my mum's father, it was more the I'll give you something to cry about type.
Wasn't really spoken about. I know my father, he was a very emotional person, but he wouldn't have done it that often. Most prominent time was when my brother was drowned, and he was 8 years old. That was terrible. I just feel emotion now. So, it affected both my parents substantially. I don't think they ever got over it, particularly when someone so young loses their life. They got so much ahead of them. I was 12 years old, but I was still very fresh in my memory.
Society is very contradictory when it comes to stuff like that. You're a real man if you cry, or you're a pussy if you cry. There's no in between. There's no you this or that. But basically, my parents sort of raised me to be an understanding human being.
I never saw a man cry when I was growing up in Scotland. My uncles, my dad, my grandfathers, I never saw them ever saw any other emotion other than probably, a bit of anger and a bit of humour. I was always sensitive, and like if you did cry or get emotional, it was you're a sissy and a sook.
Suck it up and get on with life. Is there anything else you'd like to say about men and crying?
People nowadays, in this day and age, enjoy men being in touch with their feminine side.
It takes the emotion out of the cerebral and much more into the physical. You just let it happen.
In my opinion, it's okay to cry.
There have been times when I have felt very, very sad, very low, and do get to that sobbing, point in crying. You might not be able to resolve the issue, but I come back to it is quite cathartic in terms of at least you get to that point where you've been able to do something about the emotions that you're feeling at the time, and it makes you I think, more able to then cope with, deal with, you know, try and address whatever the issues are that have got you to that state. So I guess the last thing I would say is I thoroughly recommend it.
I don't like to cry, so cry if you want. That's all.
I think it's a very human thing to cry.
My simple statement, I think, is that accept it. That if the emotional response is appropriate, it's silly to deny it, because I think that's unhealthy.
There are acceptable reasons to cry, I suppose.
Well, there are times in life where the crying is a poignant thing and it's not to be shut away.
I think that it's totally fine to cry. I think it's actually a really good stress management tool.
There's nothing wrong with crying. It's a physical reaction. And yeah, just if there's a stigma against it, it's because you're an idiot. You just don't. If someone cries, attempt to empathise.
Might be much better for society and for individuals to respond by crying in a stressful situation and looking for someone to thump.
Expressing your pain and your emotion is another form of communication. I see nothing wrong with it. Cry your hearts out.
I haven't felt burdened by it, and so then I can't tell, my male colleagues anything any different. I have no useful insight.
There is a more general stigma for men talking about things like this, which I personally think is absolutely crazy and there needs to be more of.
Maybe if men did show a bit more emotion, they might be better off for it.
Like every once in a while when things happen or you find something, like, if you feel like crying, you may as well. I mean, why not?
It's clearly good for us. It's by design. It's part of us.
Yeah.
There's no point denying it.
It's a healthy thing. The idea of a guy who cries with some sort of regularity bothers me a hell of a lot less than the idea of somebody who never cries or never admits that they cry. I think that is a bother. That would worry me.
Boys cry and they keep on crying when they're adolescents, and they know that it's okay to keep on crying into their adulthood. That's what I'd like men to know.
I glimpsed a teardrop rolling by, and I wonder why is it we cry? What's in a tear? Is it sorrow or maybe fear? To me this is so unclear. Inarticulate grief or some bitter relief is the reason we grind our teeth and can't find some sleep. A fluid journey, brave and strong. Recognition, maybe we were just plain wrong. I have felt pain and some joy in my brain since a little boy. Tears continue as I come to see I've lost my soul and that tear is me.